The X-Mid tents are designed to be very simple to pitch because the last thing you want to be doing when bad weather's rolling in is fiddling with a complicated tent. Still, there are some things to keep in mind for the best possible pitch. So in this pitching guide, what we're going to do is take a quick look at the basic pitch, and then we're going to go through that process in more detail to show some of the finer points. Then we'll look at troubleshooting some of the common issues, and then a few other things. We'll look at how to beef it up for stormy weather and some of the variations that are possible, like porch mode, a stargazer mode, a desert mode. We'll show you all of these things. The X-Mid is based around a simpler rectangle shape, which means it can be pitched with as few as 4 stakes. To set it up, start by staking out the rectangle base. I like to stake one end, pull out a third corner at 90 degrees, and then stake the fourth corner where it pulls tight. Then you can simply insert the 2 poles and extend them until the fly is tight. Unlike competing tents, there are no odd angles to estimate and no need to measure your pole lengths or other distances. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you pitch your X-Mid is to have the right equipment. So obviously you're going to need to have your tent, and then you're going to need to have your 2 trekking poles or folding poles. Ideally they would be adjustable length. And then you're going to want to have the right stakes. So stakes are something where you do want to have the appropriate stakes for the conditions. When it's kind of regular soil, you can get away with more of a medium-sized stake. If it's softer soils or if it's more high winds and extreme conditions, you're going to want a larger stake. And other times, if it's really firm soils or other conditions, you can get away with a lighter stake, or if it's a less important staking point, the 4 corners are going to tend to need bigger stakes, and just adding extra stakes around the base could use smaller ones. So one thing you want to keep in mind is where you're going to be sleeping. With the X-Mid, the floor is on a diagonal relative to the fly, so the floor is rotated a bit to the left, which means when you throw out the fly, you want to twist it a bit to the right so that your floor is where you want to be. When you've got the tent laid out, the next thing you're going to want to do is stake one of the ends of the fly. And when you do this, something that can be handy is to just partially insert the stakes, because you could end up needing to move them later. So there's not a lot of point to spending a lot of time hammering it in around rocks and things like that if you're just going to end up needing to move it. So I like to quickly just put them in halfway, and then when all the positions are good, then I come around and put them in the rest of the way. Once you've got the 2 corners at one end staked out, you're going to need to stake out the other end so that the base of the fly is an accurate rectangle. To get an accurate rectangle, there are 2 methods. The first method is you can pull out that 3rd corner and eyeball 90 degrees. Then you can just pull the 4th corner out where it pulls tight. The second method is to fold the tent to find the center. When you fold the 2 corners to the center, you can find the point where both of those edge lines pull tight. That's going to be the center line of the tent. Then, because you folded the tent, you can also find the middle of that end side, and you can place it right along that center line, and then just unfold the 2 sides of the tent to put those corners in the right positions. The goal when you're putting in the stakes at the corners is to get those stakes at about 45 degrees so they're pulling on both sides of the tent. If the stake is way off to one side, you won't have even tension on both sides. Once you've got all 4 corners staked out and you've got the stakes fully inserted, then the last thing you can do for the base is to tighten it up. It's really important to get the base tension tight, because what that's going to do is limit the pulls to the correct height. If the base is too loose, your pulls will overextend and you'll end up with loose sides on your tent. So with the base properly staked out in a rectangle that's accurate and tight, the next step is to add the poles. How you add the poles is going to differ for some of our different tent models. The regular and the solid tents are going to pitch with the pole tip up, whereas the Pro Series tents are going to pitch with the handle up. Either way, to add the pole, what you can do is open the door of the tent, and then you're going to insert the pole in whatever orientation is applicable for your model. And then you're going to want to make sure that you extend it firmly. It's important to extend the pole firmly so that the fly is tight. Then you can repeat this at the end. So now the tent should be up, and it should be looking good if you follow the 3 keys for a good pitch, which are having that base in an accurate rectangle, tensioning it up fairly tight before you add those poles, and then extending the poles quite firmly. So with your tent pitch, something I like to do is add a stake at any door that you're going to be using. This is going to do 3 things. It's going to make the zippers operate one-handed on the fly. It's going to hold the small side of the door in place when the door's open. And the other thing you can do with this is if you put it in at an angle like this, then it's going to take that tension off the base so that there's less tension on the zippers. It's a little easier on your zipper and just a little bit easier to operate them. If you do need to add the inner, what you need to do is lay it out on the diagonal between the 2 poles and then clip it to the 4 corners and the 2 peaks. There's also connections at the bottom of the poles that can help the floor lay a bit nicer, and on some of the models there are further clips along the top of the door to pull it wider for a little bit more space. So when you add the inner tent, you can clip it to the 4 corners either while you're inside the tent, or you can go around the tent and do it from the outside. When you are clipping to the inside corners of the fly, there are 2 ways that you can do it. You can clip either to the D-rings, where it's not going to come undone when you're taking apart the tent between pitches, but it also is harder to do up and undo, or you can clip it to the grow grain here, where it's much easier to clip it and to unclip it, but it might come apart, not when you're using the tent, but when you have it packed up. When it comes time to pack up the tent, if you have one of our double wall models, you can remove the inner or you can leave it clipped inside for next time. If the fly's wet from rain or condensation, it's nice to remove the inner so you can keep it dry. But if everything's pretty dry already, it's nice to pack it up all together, and that way it's just going to be simpler to pitch next time. There are 2 common issues that people have with their X-Mid pitch. We're going to look at both of those issues, what causes them, and how you can fix them. So the first issue that people have is they get loose sides on their tent. It's really loose like this. And what they do is they say, well, I just got to tighten up the base. They try to tighten it at the corner, but the corner seam is actually quite tight. So you can't actually just fix this by tightening up the corners. So what's caused this is that the base of the tent wasn't tight when you added the poles. What happened then is the poles extended too tall and it's sucking the sides in. You can't tighten it up later because the poles are too tall. So the solution is to lower the poles by a few inches to take that tension off. Then you can tighten the base, and then you can re-extend the poles to wherever they pull tight. So the second type of troubleshooting issue you might have is that somewhere on the fly is loose. It could be a loose ridge line and loose sides where you feel like you've done everything right. You think you staked out the rectangle in a pretty accurate square, you tightened it up, you extended the poles firmly, and then you're getting a loose area on the fly. It's typically going to be a loose ridge line or loose sides. So for a lot of you that just want to know how to fix this, you can just skip ahead. But for the geeks that really want to understand this, I'll explain what's happening quickly. So typically what's happening is when you stake the tent, it actually isn't a rectangle, it's skewed to one side or to the other, and that's making the fly tight across one diagonal but loose on the other. That can happen from a skew, or it can happen because of elevation where one corner is higher and lower. So when you extended the poles, you extend them firmly, that pole would have been stopped by something, where there are really 2 lines across the peak. There's this line going over the peak here, and there's this other crossing line here. Ideally, both of those would pull tight at the same time and the whole tent would be tight. But if the tent's skewed one way, one of those is going to pull tight before the other. And as a result of that, you're either going to get a loose ridge line or loose sides, where the ridge line's tight but the sides are being sucked in. So to fix this, basically what we need to do is just adjust the base back into square. To do that, we're going to tighten 2 of the corners and loosen 2 of the corners to morph that base back. The X-Mid isn't a 4-season tent for extreme conditions, but it is a very capable 3-season tent that does quite well in stormy weather thanks to a number of attributes like the fly first pitch. It's a simple pitch, so it's not a lot to fiddle with. It also is wind stable, which means there's no steps to the process where the whole thing's going to tip over when it's half erected. And it's got a number of options for reinforcing the pitch: peak guy outs, side guy outs, stakes. So we're going to show some of those things, how you can use them to reinforce the pitch for tough conditions. So when you're going to pitch it in stormy weather, the first thing you want to make sure of is that your core pitch is good, which really means that it's tight all over. So you want to be picky about the tension on your core pitch. If your tent is loose around the bottom, around the sides, you're going to want to lower those peaks, tighten up the base more, and then re-extend the peaks. And then if your fly has some issues like we've talked about, you're going to want to correct that. So the ridgeline's tight. Basically the tent is tight all over. That's going to give you the best performance. It's going to be the most stable in high wind conditions. Another thing you want to keep in mind is potentially pitching the tent lower in high winds. So there are a number of cords around the base, and those cords act like an extension of the fly, where if you have pitched it with quite long cords, the whole tent's going to have lifted higher, whereas if you have staked it out with short cords, the whole thing's going to be hunkered down to the ground. This is something you can't easily change after the tent's up, so when you're staking it out, set those cords shorter and it'll give you that lower pitch that's going to be better in high winds. A third thing to consider is that some of our tent models have had a simpler shock cord at the doors instead of more of a regular guy line. So if you do have a model with shock cord and you're planning on using it in pretty extreme conditions or stormy conditions, then I would look to replace that shock cord with a static cord. With the core pitch looking good, the next step is to add the peak guy lines. If your tent doesn't have these, you can add them at the peaks. What you're going to want to do with these guy lines is stake them out approximately along the ridge line. The guy line is going to be stronger the further away from the tent you stake it, but it's also going to be a bit more of a hassle for potentially tripping over. So in extreme conditions, you could use a longer line, but most of the time you're fine with a guy line around 6 feet or 1.5 meters. Another nice thing to add in stormy conditions are the side panel guy lines. These are guy lines that will produce side panel deflection, and the best way to deploy these is to pull them down at an angle that is approximately the same slope as the roof, so you're basically pulling directly away from the peak to anchor the peak on that side. When you do this on both sides of the tent, then it really stabilizes the sides of the tent. Lastly, what you can do is add more stakes around the base of the tent. There's guy out points for up to 12 stakes around the base. You can add stakes at all of those if you feel like it's needed. You can even, in extreme conditions, you can go a step further and you can modify these lines to add even multiple stakes at one point, although that really shouldn't be needed. The X-Mid is a highly versatile shelter, so there are a lot of different pitch variations you can do to adapt it for different conditions. The first of those is the full open sides mode. So here what you're going to do is for the small side of the door, instead of staking that down, you can actually fold it around the corner and tie it to the stake point on the end. That fully opens up the side of the tent, gives you more views, more ventilation, and allows you to do a 4-stake pitch without having the small sides of the doors just kind of hanging in the doorways. If you want to open up your X-Mid even more for those beautiful summer days, what you can do is roll back the fly almost the entire way. To do this, what you do is you start by disconnecting the inner at one of the corners and staking down the inner. You can use the same stake as was used for the fly corner. Then you can disconnect the fly at that corner, and starting from the door, just roll the fly back all the way around the tent, all the way to the far corner. This completely opens up one side of the tent. You can also fold that small side of the door around the corner to fully open that side. And you can repeat the same thing on the other side of the tent to have essentially 360 views outside of the tent, while it's also easy to roll the fly right back to shelter things up again. Another neat mode you can do with your X-Mid tent is desert mode. This is where you roll up the corners of the tent in a zipperless mode instead of using the zippers. It's ideal for the deserts because those are sandy environments that can be quite hard on the zippers if you're using them regularly. With this mode, what you're going to do is you're going to deploy the peak guy line at one of the corners. It's best to stake it down right by the corner of the tent and then clip the inner tent to the base of that guy line. Like this, you can unstake the corner of the fly, roll it up, and tie it securely at the peak. When the weather's not so nice, maybe it's overcast, drizzly, rainy, something you can do to make it more livable is called porch mode. In this mode, what you're going to do is open up the large door of the fly and prop it open with an extra pole or a stick into a porch, which gives a protected living space beside the inner tent. To do this, what you need to do is take some guy line and tie it to the base of the door. Then add a small loop right below that for your pole tip. Extend your pole until the height's about right, and then stake down that guy line to hold everything in position. The fly will still give enough coverage on the inner that it will keep the inner protected from falling rain. Another variation that can be helpful is the skinny pitch mode, where you're collapsing one or both of the vestibules to fit into a campsite that otherwise might not be quite large enough for your tent. There are a bunch of ways to do this, and I'm going to make an extra supplemental video to show you some of these different options. But quickly, typically what you're going to be doing is adding an extra stake point on the end wall and connecting the inner and the fly to this point. That makes sure the inner floor is fully secured at the four corners. Also deploy the peak guy line to hold the fly peak in position, and then you can unstake both the inner and the fly from the corner of the tent. Another way you can use your X-Mid tent is to use it just with the fly only. With the fly only, you just simply don't add the inner tent, and you can save some weight if it's outside bug season. You can sleep in the same position as normal between the two poles, but you can also shift the pole bottoms towards the center line of the shelter and sleep two people in the tent in fly only mode. Pitching just the inner tent can be nice in hot conditions, or if it's really nice weather and you want to save weight and leave the fly at home. To do that, what you're going to do is stake down the four corners of the inner, keeping in mind it does have a parallelogram shape and not a true rectangle. Once you've got the corners staked down, you can either use our Stargazer kit that clips to the inner peaks and makes everything really simple with grommets for adding your pole tips and tensioners, or you can rig up something yourself with knots. Either way, what you're going to do is connect your poles at the two peaks, extend them until the inner's tight, and then the important thing is to stake out those lines at the same angle as the ridge line. If you have the guy line staked out at an angle, it's going to twist the inner tent and cause you to lose space inside.